Welcome to the journey. This is my name is Kevin Polky, and I have an extra special guest returning to the journey today. Um, uh, an individual that I've become friends with over the last year or so. We actually work for the same parent company, and she just recently moved to Ohio, and as she's transitioning there, but Theresa Gasser is someone that has been a resource for me in multiple ways, and just really have enjoyed getting to know you over time. So welcome to the journey. I think we did our first episode. I want to say it was in the winter. I know that for sure.
It was.
But I think it was like January, December, January, something along that lines.
Yes,
So.
not too long ago, and thank you for having me back. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
not a problem. So, just for some of the individuals that may not have listened to the first episode, um, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, what do you do for fun? And some of the and just moved to Ohio. So, why don't you kind of just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do for fun, and then what do you do professionally?
Oh, okay. Well, we'll start off with the fun part always. So
Mm,
I just,
okay.
as you said, moved back to Ohio from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a charming little town with a lot of sunshine. Back to Ohio, where it's not so sunny, but it's a great place. Have family here. Important to be near family this time of my life. So I came back up here and I've really enjoyed it. Enjoyed being with my children and my niece and her family. So it's been a great time. It's pretty much what I do for fun is just spend time with the family. Love football. I am a huge college pro football fan. None of my teams, I have three pro teams. Not one of them won yesterday. My favorite being the Saints.
Mm,
So the GOAT got us
yeah.
yesterday. Love Ohio State football, but also love Auburn and Ole Miss. So I have three different colleges. So it was a rough football weekend at my house, but it was okay. Love going to the beach and I love to read. And as you know, I write. So
Mhm.
I know a lot of people think writing it is fun. I can only do it when I'm really not stressed out and overwhelmed with things. So that makes it a little bit more difficult because it is something I really enjoy doing. So
Sure,
those are
sure.
my fun things. But the beach, you can take me to the beach anytime.
Sure, sure. Well, and you did at least have the one Ohio State absolutely tore up Toledo. I mean,
Oh,
and
it was a beating.
oh my
But then again, we were
goodness.
playing. No offense to any Toledo fans out there, but we were playing a smaller school, so we should have won that game. So, but
Yeah.
it was good to win.
Yeah. Well, and that definitely was not what happened throughout the teams on Saturday, because there were some underdogs that ended up playing really well and beating some
Oh yeah,
some bigger teams. But in Toledo was undefeated at that time and was is one of
yeah.
I believe one of the favorites in the MAC. Even though the MAC is definitely smaller than the Big Ten. But I have
Mhm.
a friend of mine who Kurt Heidelberg used to is from Toledo and used to coach at Toledo. He's now coaching over in Europe. We coached together for a time period in
Oh wow.
Rockford, and so he's obviously a big Ohio State fan as well. But obviously, we had to pick and choose. He has to go with his alma mater, and I imagine it was a little bit
Exactly.
rougher day there. So.
Well, a little fun fact, I went to Case Western for my graduate work, had no clue we had a football team until the second year we were there. I was studying and all these people were walking by and I said to somebody, "Where is everybody going?" They're like, "To the football game." I'm like, "We have a football team?" Did not even know we had a football team. Talk about
Yeah,
embarrassing, especially
yeah,
being a football fan, but
yeah.
yeah, it was fun.
And I've been probably a college football fan. I've loved football my entire life, but college football fan has always been my preference. And being able to watch games, and even just picking up on games, teams that I don't have necessarily any super allegiance to, other than some teams I do more so than others, but just watching good football being played is really the part for me that's enjoyable.
Me too. Me too. And I've been very fortunate to meet a couple of football players that have played in college and gone on to play in the NFL. And I'll tell you the resiliency of some of these college football players who, are slotted to go, to the pros and then have an injury. The young men that I've gotten to know have just been amazing. Their resiliency to move forward. And I'm just blown away by some of the stuff that I see them accomplish when their dreams were like shattered, which I know we're going to kind of talk a little bit about suicide and depression and all that stuff today, but it's really amazing to me.
Yeah, no, I agree, and for such a small percentage of all the individuals that are involved with football at the lower levels, such a small percentage that get the opportunity to go and play in the pros, and then have a career that lasts more than just a couple of years, is pretty amazing in itself. So I agree that
Yeah.
that aspect of resilience, and and there's some things to be said. I mean, we from the Rockford area, we have five individuals from the Rockford area that are now playing in the pros. And
Wow.
so one of them is a third stringer that plays for New Orleans, and then James Robinson is playing for Jacksonville this year, and has been. This is his third year, and he was at a small school, small private Christian school in Rockford, and went to Illinois State.
Oh, wow.
And he was an undrafted free agent, got picked up, and has started for Jacksonville every year since.
Isn't that crazy?
So this is a pretty
But see,
pretty amazing.
the player who's at New Orleans has the food, so, you've got New Orleans for food, so
Yeah,
that's always a good thing.
yeah, yep, exactly. So Therese, tell us a little bit about what you're doing professionally now, and
Yeah.
what your background educationally is, and what you're doing professionally now.
Yeah, so my undergrad was in psychology, and then I went on and got a teaching certificate, taught high school for a little while, high school history, knew I was gonna get into counseling, go towards my master's. It was just kind of a way to fill a gap, which I didn't realize was gonna actually end up being something that I ended up doing long term. I have a love for teaching. My 2 children's books are educational by nature to help kids with anxiety, depression, and staying safe. And I'm writing another one on PTSD for children. So it's really going to be a really good book, and I'm really excited about it. It's just, like I said, being creative and finding that time to finish it. Right now, I'm Vice President of Learning and Development for Refresh Mental Health, and I get to do what I love. I get to create education for people who are helping others. And, to me, that's really important. I remember getting my master's degree and, as a school social worker for a while, and realized the need to go into private practice to really work with kids. I felt very overwhelmed with caseloads of 600-700 people, and there's just it's impossible to really keep up with that. And I thought I could go in and help the masses in the schools, and ended up realizing that I really needed to work with individuals. So became a trauma expert and really just never looked back from an educating standpoint, just kept going, like, I'm going to keep teaching at some level. So I continued education hours for providers throughout my career of owning my own private practice. And then this opportunity came along, and I realized I could really help educators or help clinicians and non-clinicians with supporting people who are coming in and seeking help. And I think, sometimes we don't realize how much our administrative staff is right on the front line before even the counselors sometimes. So I felt it was really important to just get to that educational place. And like I said, I've been lucky to do that here at Refresh.
Perfect. This being Suicide Awareness Month, right? So September is designated as this time period where we talk more openly and more actively about, um, for us specifically at Shatter Our Silence, talking about what are the factors that lead specifically to young adult suicide, um, and what are some things that we can do to educate not only the young adults but their family members, significant others, and the professionals that work with them. But obviously, we work with all demographics, not just young adults.
Right.
For you, I don't know if when did you start practicing clinically? When did you start practice clinically?
I
Like
started, well, I
roughly.
was doing school social work in 2000, starting in 2003.
Okay.
Um, so really got to see the shift in mental health over the years, seeing younger and younger people with a suicide ideation. When I started back then, I was a school social worker. Gosh, pretty much until 2009, I was doing school social work, and doing some private practice, small, few clients, but
Mhm.
not a extreme caseload. Um, 2009, I was working on an alternative education program, and that's when I really realized I needed to go into private practice full time. Um, Saw a lot of increase in SI, during my time, my tenure kind of as a school social worker, and younger children
Mhm.
having SI that I hadn't. I had just not experienced that early on in my career. So it was a big shift for me. And then I started getting a lot of clients who were the survivors of people who had completed suicide. And so, really, I would say probably 2013, 14 was when I really started to see an uptick in my practice of people that I was working with who had been impacted by suicide at some level, whether it was somebody who had contemplated it, was attempting it, or had completed. So that was when I really started becoming more and more interested in teaching on it, and learning everything that I could about it. I'm also a veteran, so I know, our suicide rate amongst veterans is incredibly high. And I think the hardest thing for me is that sometimes they don't give you the warning signs that they're going to take their life. And so that was really hard for me, and even made it more important to me to teach everybody who has a touch point with that patient that they have some level of training so they can spot some things that just normally aren't spottable if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And I know the first time that I was impacted by suicide, I was a freshman in college, and 100% I did not at all see any of those signs, and it was only afterwards that, talking to different people who knew, who lived with him, that that we started piecing things together. I think I think there's no way of ever knowing why someone dies by suicide, because the answers go with the person.
Exactly.
They can leave a note, but that isn't going to be the whole story.
Right. I think too, Kevin, one of the hardest things that I've recognized is, while we're talking, I had this memory of back when I was in the Air Force. This was back in the, mid to late 80s. And I had a friend whose father had completed suicide. And she was an older woman at that point, and her maybe the late 20s. And I remember not even knowing how to talk to her about it, and pretty much just saying I'm sorry, and then moving on. Now I wish I had known what I know now. I would have sat down and talked with her more about how it impacted her, how what it made her feel. I think a lot of times we end with the person who completed suicide and not recognizing that they leave an aftermath of people that we have to work with and we have to support. And so, I found that because my practice predominantly, I would get the people who were the survivors of it.
Yeah.
And it was really tough to understand what they were going through until you start really listening.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, because throughout, I first started working in corrections and then worked in a psychiatric hospital, and so having a patient die from suicide, or people being suicidal, obviously with acute inpatient care, that's a pretty typical thing that was happening. But and then when working as a school social worker as well, and then doing clinical work in the evenings, I would see that aspect of it. But again, um it wasn't all the time, right? And then when I opened KP up there, I wasn't, again, there would be times when someone would be suicidal, but there wasn't all the time. And I remember that ripple effect that you're talking about is when I got called. I remember exactly the day it was and everything. And we had probably helped out some other schools regarding, if there had been I remember one little girl, she was maybe sixth grade. She had died from an asthma attack, and we came in and helped do the post-vention processing and working with and giving support to the staff and the students. But when in 2012, April 2012 was the first time that we got brought into my son and daughter's school, when my son's classmate, she died from suicide. And it was everything that you said. The entire school was in shock.
Mhm.
There was, people didn't know what to do with it. I mean, so KP was there to help with that. And then because there was three of them, 2012, 14, and 15, he had 3 out of 100 of his classmates die from suicide. That's really how Shatter Our Silence got launched, without any real plan, other than I knew that I had to do something. um,
Right.
and that's really how that all happened. And then since then, of course, it ends up, I know a whole lot more now than I ever did before, because to teach it, I've had to study it, had to really spend more time. And then the more that I do that, the more that I have people that have family members or individuals themselves are on my radar more often now.
Well, and I think it's amazing that once people know you're not afraid to talk about it, that you're willing to kind of get in the trenches with them, they're more likely to talk to you
Hmm.
about what's going on with them. I teach when I do teach on it. I always say to people, asking the question is not going to make somebody have the thought.
Right.
And a lot of people a lot of people are confused by that. There's this myth that if you talk about it, you'll put the idea into somebody's mind.
Yep.
And the reality is that it's already in their mind. They're already thinking it, and they're thinking, you know, what is it? What in the '70s when they decriminalized suicide?
Yep.
That's why I don't use the word committed, and I use the word completed because
Yep.
it's they're doing it because they're typically mentally ill.
Hmm.
There's something going on in their brain, and they're not getting the support that is helping them. They may be getting support, but it's not the support that's helping them. And I always say to people, when I'm working with somebody, it's the first question I ask. I want to know, do you have thoughts? And sometimes you'll get that kind of that hemming and hawing of things, and people are afraid you're going to put them in the psych hospital if they say yes. And it's really just layering that conversation, and knowing the patient, and getting them to trust you enough to sit down and talk about it and not fear the retaliation as they consider it to be sometimes, of what will happen if they actually speak about it.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that, such a there's a difference based upon demographic, right?
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
with, the young adult mind, the adolescent young adult mind is so undeveloped, and the propensity toward impulsiveness is different than the 40-year-old's mind, who may be able to, again, taking in consideration that they've developed to be 40 years old emotionally, right?
Right.
That there's going to be a different mindset, because it's totally counterintuitive, right? I mean, as human beings, as animals, it's totally counterintuitive to want to take your own life, because it's about survival. I mean,
Right.
we're designed to survive. So the degree of hopelessness and the degree of having to somehow work themselves into a place of not being afraid of the permanency of death is so counterintuitive. And I think that's where, like, when you talk about that some type or some form of mental illness is is playing a part in their thinking.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think, I'm reminded of a woman who called me one time, and she had a 5-year-old, and she said, I need to bring my 5-year-old into therapy. I stated they wanted to kill themselves. And I said, well, did you ask them what the word kill themselves means? And she's like, well, no, I'm panicked. I need to bring them in. I said, well, ask them what that word means to them, and then call me back and we'll schedule an appointment. The child had no idea what the word meant.
Right.
Like they had just heard somebody say, ah, I want to kill myself, you know, and people just say it so flippantly without understanding the impact of those words to maybe a 5-year-old who is hearing that. But the 5-year-old had no clue,
Yep.
what they were even saying. Um, but I think people are so afraid to ask that question because what if the 5-year-old says, I want to do X, Y, and Z? And so, I very rarely will find a 5-year-old that has the language to go there. Usually they don't know what they're talking about. But I think it's asking the questions, whether they're 5, 15, or 50. What does that mean?
Mhm.
I know when I say something like, I'll say, I'm not even gonna say what I say, but sometimes I'll say something and I look at whoever I'm talking to, like, I don't mean literally, like
Yep.
I'm okay,
Yep.
because I want them to know, like, no, I am okay,
Yep.
and I can, but we have language that we have been accustomed to growing up that we say that sometimes slips out when we don't mean what we're saying. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, to your point, where because of, in our world, right, we refer to it as countertransference. So that aspect of, I'm having an emotional reaction because someone else is talking to me about something, and I'm all wound, and I can't see clearly because my translation of it is distracting me,
Exactly.
to either over respond or under respond. But to your point, a 10-year-old may say, because they're upset, I'm going to kill you. doesn't necessarily mean they're homicidal,
Exactly. Exactly.
and or let alone have a plan or a means to be homicidal.
But something else too is when I'm working with people, I was doing a training for some military doctors. This is decades ago, so you'd never figure out who he was because it was decades ago.
Mhm.
So I'm training, and I talked to them. It was about child abuse and recognizing in the chart things that would be things you need to look at to see if a child was being abused, and ask more questions about. And you might have to go back, even 10 sessions or ten visits to like pick up a pattern of some things that are going on with a kiddo. And I remember him saying to me, "Look, I'm tired at the end of the day, and I've got to get home to my family, and I don't want to open up that can of worms per se." And my response was, "Well, then just send the child home to be abused some more." I mean, but it's no different with suicide. If you're afraid to ask the questions, there's long-term consequences. And and I'm a clinician. I get that really. You've got 7 minutes left. You've already run over the session by 3 minutes, and you're 7 minutes to your next patient, and you're like, oh. And then it comes up, and there's that natural instinct, I think, to go, oh no, I'm going to be late for my next patient. And you have to fight that, and in some ways, and go. And I want to make sure I'm saying this the right way, Kevin, but it's it's recognizing that sometimes we don't want to know the answer to the questions,
Mhm.
and we have to be willing to put ourselves out there, whether it's a patient or a friend or a colleague, like asking the question. If you notice something, if your knower, I always call it the knower, if your knower says something's not right, something's probably not right.
Right.
And asking the question, yes, it might make you 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes late. You might even have to cancel your next session, but you have that one opportunity to change something. And I remember sitting on the floor with a client one time for 2 hours after session, because I knew if I sent this client to the hospital, they were going to lie. They were not going to be truthful when they got to the hospital. They were going to say they were fine, they were just having a moment. And sitting with that client until I knew that client had worked through what they needed to work through. um, I don't know. I find it really important work. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of why I do it still.
No, absolutely. And I think, because of that, that impact, that ripple effect that happens that once a person dies by suicide specifically, because there's so many unanswered questions. There's such, I mean, there's a lot of things that happen when someone dies, either by an accident or by homicide, or by an illness or something that we deem as premature. But usually in most of those cases, we have somewhere where we can point our energy or our anger or our grief or whatever it is. With
Right.
suicide, I think it's one of those times where we go even more so internal. What could I have done? What should I have done? Why did this happen? Because it's almost not knowing for sure who to blame, and which is a
Right.
very human, normal thing,
Well,
to
there's all that feelings of guilt, and guilt can come for a host of reasons.
yeah.
Gosh, there's just so many um, layers to the relationships, and to the details that have happened in the weeks prior to. And there's just so many things that people carry around, just a ton of different feelings with. And I think that's the hardest thing that I've seen with survivors of completed suicide. They do go back and they ask the questions over and over again, and would have, should have, could have, and I think it's the hardest place to live.
Right,
Do you
absolutely.
think that's why we see an increase in suicide and family members and friends and stuff after somebody has completed suicide? What's the research? I haven't read anything on that recently.
I think it's probably a combination of different reasons. I mean, one is, we talk about there are factors that lead to a person having a predisposition, right? And so when I'm teaching on it, we talk about, in the school system, it would be adverse childhood experiences, right? Sexual assault, bullied, domestic violence, eating disorder, body image, self-harm, those types of factors those are going to be, those are going to be tendencies similar to alcoholism or drug addiction. It doesn't it isn't in a vacuum, because
Right.
it carries over, not just the genetic susceptibility to addiction, but then the environmental aspect of addiction, the the interaction, the emotional unavailability, um, all those factors that play into it. So
Well, it's really hard to, I think, for people who've been through things, and not for everybody. We will talk about resiliency probably, I'm sure, in this next couple of minutes, but I think when you have an experience, these adverse childhood experiences, and you move forward in life with those things, I think sometimes it's really hard to even develop a true intimacy with anybody. Not, and I'm not talking about sexual intimacy. I'm talking about an emotional intimacy, because you don't trust people.
mhm,
And so, how are you going to go talk to somebody about feelings of wanting to take your life when you don't trust anybody enough to really share that experience that you're feeling with anybody else? And so I think that's a really big struggle for people. Now, I will say, I know a lot of survivors of adverse childhood experiences who are rocking the world. And so, fortunately, I think there's more resilient people out there than we realize.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of, you know, I think number one, the biggest thing is to have conversations about the factors that lead to young adults, or lead to suicide, right? And just talking about suicide and how to talk about suicide, right? What some do's and don'ts, those types of things. The idea of ACEs, right? When I went out to, Edwards Air Force Base a year ago, we talked about, being able to ACE, being able to ask those questions that you're referring to, doing in a non-judgmental, caring way, and then being having the courage to escort somebody or bring somebody to get help, regardless if that's a counselor, or if that means a higher level of treatment, or whatever it may be. And so we can educate and about being able to talk about, break the silence around it, and we can educate about these different factors that allow someone to be, because someone just doesn't wake up and go, oh, today I want to die. That isn't, there's things that have happened in that person's life, and their perception about it, which is their reality of how those things are, and the sense of hopelessness. But I also want to talk about the development of resilience, right? So I think if the pandemic has taught us nothing, it's taught us that we know that we can't control all the stressors in our life. All we
Right.
can control is how we manage stress.
Right.
And so we won't be able to control all the risk factors in a person's life, but helping that person develop protective factors, really, for me, I believe, is the biggest antidote to an individual. Go ahead.
Oh, I think so too. And I had my little notes that I left in the other room, but I remember it now. I really, I think the amount of social media and um, watching other people's lives and not really living, really impacts, especially our adolescents and our young adults. I can even find myself. I had to remove TikTok from my phone because I could find myself sitting there, and an hour later, I mean, I always joked around and said, "Oh, I get recipes off of there." But in between, and I did. I love to cook. That should have said that was one of my things too. But I would find myself scrolling, and even though I'm looking for food, sometimes these negative things would come up on my Facebook. And it's an algorithm. If you sit on it too long, they send you more negative, more negative, more negative. And I think when we as a population are hearing negative and seeing negative and not taking care of ourselves and not exercising and not eating right, what is the statistic, like 30 minutes of cardio, I think it reduces your anxiety, depression levels by like 60-70%.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that's huge. But if we're not moving for 30 minutes a day, and we're sitting feeding our brain negative stuff all the time, and negative's relative to whoever you are, right?
right.
I mean, negative might, I might not find one thing negative and you find something, the same exact thing negative. So we have to remind ourselves that what's negative to me.
So going along that line, right? So what happens that, chemically, when we're exposed to something that we perceive as being negative, right? So if the same information, somebody else would see that as positive,
Hmm.
right? Tampa Bay fans yesterday saw that yesterday's win as positive. New Orleans fans saw that as negative, correct? Right.
Correct. Very correct.
And so and then so what is the impact of something being negative, right? So something positive will give us dopamine, help us feel good. Something negative is going to be perceived as a threat, so that we are then, regardless of how much ownership you have in the New Orleans Saints or not is irrelevant. It's just that you perceive their loss as negative, and then that's somehow a threat to some place, and chemicals are released. And if we
Well,
don't,
it's almost like a toxic relationship, me and the Saints right now.
yeah,
So, you know what I mean? And I love my Saints. So,
yep,
but it's like you said, it's the ups and the downs, the ups and the downs.
yep. And if we're not doing anything with those chemicals, just experiencing it, if we don't burn them off in some way, where do they go? Well, they don't go anywhere. They just interfere with our sleep. They interfere with our relationships, those types of things. So
Exactly.
when you think of, so two things I want to make sure we touch on before we before we end. The idea of developing resilience and helping develop resilience within ourselves and helping others, and the idea of meaning, finding, Viktor Frankl talks about the primary thing in life is to find meaning in life.
Yeah.
And he says that's
Well,
the
he says in his book, when you understand the why, you can endure the how.
yep,
So when I understand why, what my purpose is, and that's a purpose that I create for myself, by the way.
yep,
It's not, and I think that was for me, growing up, and I've talked about this in the previous podcast, in a pretty dysfunctional home. I had to find out my why, my purpose. And one of the things that I really focused on in my career was, how do I educate? Because if you look back in my experience growing up, nobody educated me on talking and standing up for myself and saying it's okay to talk to somebody. It's okay to tell people bad things are happening. I was actually given the opposite message, that you don't do that. And so for me, I had to not only be resilient to overcome that, but I had to find out my why. And once I figured out my why, like, I'm here to educate people. I found a how.
mhm,
Okay, so I had to go get my degree, and I had to do this, and I had to do that, and I had to take a chance and put books out there, and either they're bestsellers or not bestsellers. But I remember one little guy talking to me when I was at a school reading, and he had come forward about in the middle of the reading about, his father being abusive to his mom. And if that's the only little boy that I helped, with the writing of my books, that was enough. It's
yeah,
just, that was my how. I don't know what he's going to do with his life. I don't know, the fact that he was able to speak up and what that's going to do for him 25 years from now. So I get chills thinking about it, actually, because I'm like, that's the how. And I think that's why I love, Viktor Frankl, because I read that book, and I can't think of the name of, I want to say, Man's Search for Meaning.
yep, yep,
Right.
yep.
And so, reading that book, I have, if you saw my copy, it's highlighted and written in and underlined. And, I go back to those quotes when I'm really looking at something to help somebody, in my office. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, I went off.
no, 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 exactly. And I think, and another thing that he, when I was doing some research with his work in particular, was talking about this idea that, you know, developing or discovering your why, right, your meaning, isn't necessarily done by going and sitting on a rock somewhere and waiting for it just to come to you, right? And that was interesting for me to actually, because it's never worked that way for me, but I've
Mhm.
always thought that's how it was supposed to happen.
You
So
know, it's it well, he talks about it in that book, about how, he had two men who were contemplating suicide. One who had a daughter waiting for him in a foreign country, and one who had some books on science that only he had the knowledge to complete. Two very different things. And like you said, it didn't come to Viktor Frankl or those men while they were sitting on a rock. It came through conversation. It came through really finding out who you are by what you do and what you believe, and what gives your heart joy. And I think for me, that's what resilience really is. And it could be different for everybody, as we've said before, but for me, resilience was every day waking up knowing there was something I wanted to do to make this place that we call Earth better.
Yeah, yeah. And discovering, right, this idea that either through counsel or through
Mhm.
teaching or through writing, your purpose, your why is to help people, right,
Right,
and obviously help people more specifically social emotionally, right, and
right,
and so you have different vehicles to do that, but it's what drives us when we're tired. It's what drives us when we feel, what's the point? And if we stay true to that, because I think it is about discovering. Like I just recently did a wedding and officiated a wedding, and I talked to them about, uh, do we really fall in love or do we discover that we're in love? Like
mm,
like afterwards, like we've been loving and now we go, I think I'm in love. And so it's like we discover it after we've been doing it, right,
oh,
and
cool.
so we're doing something, right, whatever that may be, and putting ourselves into it, and then we recognize that it's giving us energy back,
Right,
and I think
right.
that's when we're getting closer to our why, to that meaning.
Right. And I think that's going to be the hard, I think that's the hard part. If I were the listener sitting on the other end of this and asking the question, well, how do I get there? How do I get to that why? Okay. So for you, for me, it might've been, counseling and writing and reading and, helping people. For somebody else, it's going to be something different. And I think you just keep trying things until you get to what works for you. Counseling's not, some people don't engage in counseling. It's not their thing, but they have really great friends that they talk to. Some people, counseling is, I truly believe in counseling, obviously. Um, so I think for me, it's been the catalyst to drive me as well and help me, explore my fears a little bit more, like writing my book, my books. It was a fear of what if I fail? Well, I'm going to fail if I don't try, and I always go to Michael Jordan. He's my favorite, my
Yep.
favorite quote about him. He tried 1,000 times to hit a shot and he's missed how many free throws, but yet he's successful because he keeps trying.
Mhm.
And I think that's where, people will find that resiliency and just that ability to keep trying.
And
It
I
goes back to, go
no, go
ahead. I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No.
Goes back to my friend who, and I won't say his name, but I'll connect you with him to be on your podcast, who played college ball. And when he was going to the NFL, he was slotted. He was going, then he had a career-ending injury, and he had to find himself to what drove him, and now he's incredibly successful. And so, but he had to find that what was his drive, what was going to make him be successful. And so I think that's for me. It was just finding what really leads me to where I need to be.
Yeah. And I do think I don't know if the why or the meaning shifts, but how we deliver it um
Mhm.
definitely shifts. I mean, right now, I'm more focused on teaching and leadership development than I am doing one-on-one counseling. But what I'm doing in leadership development and teaching is very, very similar to what I was doing when I was doing counseling. It's
Well,
just on a
well, and,
different
and and now you're
scale.
at that level where you're teaching other people how to do what is naturally a gift for you, and teaching that. I can tell you, I'm going to give a shout out. He's passed away since, but Dr. Deshawn was one of my first instructors, and I have to tell you, I learned more from that man. I believe I'm the counselor and person that I am because he wasn't afraid to challenge me and push me to grow. But if he was still seeing patients, I may not have run into him. I may not have had that experience with him. And I think we do. We grow and we evolve and we change. You and I may end up back in counseling,
Yep.
doing counseling again one day. Um, Maybe not. I mean, who knows
Yep.
what will happen? But I think that's the great thing about resiliency is you find that next place.
Yeah. And I agree with you that in all stories of resilience, right? They have a couple of prerequisites, for someone to be, for someone to be resilient, right? And if that is the goal is to be resilient, that's who we admire, the Michael Jordans, the Martin Luther King Jr., the different individuals who we look at historically as people who had not only resolve but were resilient. Well, some of the prerequisites, which is not super popular today, is that you have to have failed. You have
Right.
to have setbacks. You have to have
Right.
obstacles in your path, and
Uh,
you work through them.
yeah. I don't know Michael Jordan, but if he's ever on your podcast, you have to have me on. That's got to be the rule.
Sure.
But one of my favorite people to use as quotes, especially with adolescent males, they all know who he is. Even today, they
Mhm.
everybody knows who Michael Jordan is. But very few people that I actually have in my office come in and I say, "Did you know Michael Jordan was cut from his high school team?" No,
Mhm.
well, no. They don't realize the pain he went through, the probably some of the I don't know if he ever had feelings of depression, I don't know, so I'm not speaking for him, but I would say I would probably be pretty upset and disappointed if I hadn't made the basketball team, especially when I know I'm good.
Yep.
And so it drove him to do more. I have another friend who played in the NFL, and he said to me when I said, "What was the greatest moment of your career ever?" And he said, "The day I didn't get cut, and they said you're on the team." He said, "Because I wasn't the best on the team, but I was the hardest working, and I pushed myself at ways that a lot of people didn't push themselves." And I said, "That was your greatest day?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Not the championship rings I won, not the this, not the that. That day when everything I had worked for." I had I got to where I wanted to be.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, and then he just went to the next level of what do I want to be next?
Yep. Yep. And I think that piece, especially like again, this month is, how to raise the awareness about suicide. Yes, it is talking about it. It's teaching people that to listen and how to listen. And that there are factors that someone just doesn't wake up and say, okay, today's a good day, that I don't want my life to be anymore. And so that isn't how it goes. But the antidote, because for me, I don't believe we can just talk about the awareness and education. We also have to educate and provide opportunities for the antidote, which I believe is the protective factors. It's the resilience development. It's the searching and developing opportunities for meaning, that we can then take and we can then embody in our life and then explore those.
Right. And it all goes back to in my opinion, to starting the conversation.
Mhm. Absolutely.
If you're not starting the conversation, then whether it's at a micro level or a macro level.
Yep. And you said something, and I know we've talked about it, offline, is that like in a company, right? So you may have clinicians who are trained specifically, to talk with individuals when they come behind closed doors, but those same individuals, their meaning, their why may be at the front desk, and creating a space that is inviting, engaging, and doing that part of it, or maybe in the billing department, but they have client contact. And so it's important, not only because that may very well be their why, that may be their why position,
Right.
and how critically important they are to the team, as much as the therapist or the psychiatrist or the CEO or whoever.
Well, and I think too, one of the reasons why I love training administrative support staff people is that when I'm on the phone, let's say I'm an administrative person and I'm on the phone with somebody, I don't know that they have SI. I don't know that they're going through deep depression or that they've had a major loss or whatever. I don't need to know any of that. I just need to know that I'm working with people who are coming to us, especially in a clinical world, that are hurting,
Mm.
and at whatever level that is, they're hurting, and so being really kind and supportive, and it just shows them another level of compassion, another level of you do have a value. I when people start getting mad, I mean, I've had people screaming at me on the phone at times, especially in my undergrad years when I was working at a doctor's office at the front desk. People screaming and yelling at me, and I just had to stay cool to who I was and just listen and be
Mhm.
supportive. And usually they'd come back a week or two later and apologize to me, and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I was just having a really bad day.
Sure.
But you really helped me get through that bad day." And so, it's just one more layer of how do we help folks.
Yeah. 100%. So Teresa, thank you as always for coming onto the
Yeah.
show, and thank you for sharing some of your, insight and experience and what you're doing. If someone wanted to get a hold of you and order, your two, the two books that you have right now, and as you're getting ready to finish up your third one, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Well, they can always get it on Amazon, but if they have any questions, they can always reach out to me. And it's a weird email because everybody knows me as Teresa, but it's tamiatg@gmail.com. And that's my personal email, and they can reach out to me. And I do make donations to organizations as well of those books because there are a lot of organizations who don't have big budgets. So definitely reach out.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, and thank you for everything that you're doing at Refresh Now, and bringing a level of quality education for all our levels of staff. And so
Thank
I,
you.
I appreciate that.
Me
For
too, and I appreciate all you do, and look forward to working with you some on Shatter the Silence. We've said it 100 times, but start the conversation and shatter the silence.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
As anybody who's been listening to our conversation today with Teresa and I, if you know somebody that may be struggling and could benefit from this conversation, please forward it to them, pass it along to them, and then take any tidbits that we've talked about today and share with them as well. As always, thank you for being here, and look forward to being with you next week.